To make the bracelet, you need a metal blank that has holes on either end. Ours is 6 millimeters by 35 millimeters. You need metal alphabet stamps. These are 3 millimeters. You'll need 2 silk cording pieces. Ours are 6 inches long each. Silver wire that's 24 gauge. And a magnet clasp, also in silver. For tools, you'll need a hammer, a jeweler's bench block, wire cutters, scissors, and finally you'll need double stick tape. To get started, we want to explain our setup a little bit here. We've placed our jeweler's bench block on top of a mouse pad, and the reason why you want to do that is the mouse pad will help sort of soften the blow a little bit, and it also keeps the jeweler's bench block from sliding around, which you'll see why that's important in a minute. The next thing we want to do is take our permanent double-sided tape. It doesn't need to be permanent, but ours is. We're going to take a piece of double-sided tape and just put it right across the center of our jeweler's block. And this is to keep our metal blank in place, because otherwise this metal on metal will just slide around while you're stamping, and that will make you crazy and make the letters end up all in the wrong spot. So that's going to hold it in place. Now we're going to do a name here, and we picked Kitty's name because it's a cute name and she deserves a bracelet. I'm going to make one for me too. Kitty's name has 5 letters, so what we're going to do is start in the very center of our blank here with her center letter, which is a T. If your name is longer than what will fit here with this 3 millimeter letter size, you can buy an alphabet stamp set that has a smaller font. They make them in all different sizes and fonts. You also could pick a larger blank. So I'm going to start with the letter T, which is her center letter, the center of Kitty, K-I-T-T-Y. And I'm just going to eyeball the center of this. This does not need to be perfect. That's one of the joys of metal stamping, is it has slight imperfections and it really makes it look hand done. So what I'm going to do is hold my metal alphabet stamp here in the center of my blank, and I've eyeballed where the center is, but I want to kind of feel to make sure that I'm right over the center, and I'm holding it perpendicular to my blank. And what I'm going to do is take my jeweler's hammer here, and I'm going to strike it once right in the center. Then I'm going to very gently, without moving the stamp, tip in 4 directions and stamp each time, or strike it with the hammer each time. So I'm going to go slightly to the right, slightly toward me, slightly to the left, slightly away from me. And what that does is make a deeper impression. There's my first letter. And what I'm going to do now is build out on either side from that centered letter. The next letter in Kitty's name is another T. So this is kind of the trickiest part, is lining up these letters. One thing you can do is draw yourself a guideline if you'd like, with a ruler on your metal blank. If you use a marker or something, you can then just use soap and water or an alcohol or a nail polish remover pad to remove the ink. We're just going to eyeball it because we're just going for it. So what I'm going to do is place my stamp right next to that T, kind of feel that I'm centered there from the sides. And I'm going to strike, just like I did before, 5 times. Once in the center, then I'm going to tip it in 4 directions and hit the hammer on the stamp each time. So there's the second T. It's slightly tilted, but I think that adds a little level of whimsy. So it doesn't need to be all lined up perfectly. Now we've got our Y, and I'm going to just place my block right next to that last T. One thing you could do is look at your letter on your stamp, and you can kind of learn to judge how far the letter starts from the top and bottom and from the sides, and that can help you with lining up your letters. Also, we think it's a great idea to do a test. We did several tests before we did this first one on camera. Now I'm ready to do my Y. I'm going to do the same thing I just did, striking it 5 times. There's my Y. And you can see that this is starting to curve up as I'm hammering. So what I'm going to do is turn it upside down on my metal bench block and just hammer it a couple times gently just to flatten it back out so that it'll stay on the tape when I'm doing the rest of the letters. There we go. It's a little flatter. Now I'm ready to do my I. And one thing I didn't mention, and it's funny, it doesn't matter on the I, but you want to make sure you've got it facing the right direction. Some of the letters could end up backwards if you do them upside down. So. And finally we have the K, and the K actually is a good example that you don't want to accidentally do it backwards. So make sure you've got it facing the way you want it before you place it on your blank. And I'm just going to strike this 5 times, once in the center and then one in each direction. And there's our K. And I'm going to flip it over and just hammer it a couple times to reflatten it. And now we're ready to turn this into a bracelet. To turn this into a bracelet, what we're going to do is attach a piece of our silk cording to either side of our nameplate and then attach a clasp. And to do that, we're going to show you how easy this is. We're going to take our silk cording piece, and we just pre-cut these in 6-inch lengths. So I'm going to feed that through the front of my nameplate here, and I'm going to pull through about a little over 1 inch. And that'll be on the back of our bracelet, so that's why we fed it through the front. Now we're going to take a 4-inch piece of our 24 gauge wire. We just pre-cut this. I'm going to hold the 2 cords together, take my wire, and hold that in place, and then I'm just going to wrap that around as tightly as I can to get started. Once you get your first couple wraps going, it gets easier. But I'm going to just keep wrapping here until I have about, I don't know, 8 or 10 little wraps here. So that's about 8 wraps there. And what I'm going to do now is just trim my wire, and I'm going to trim it so that the wire, the little wire end isn't going to be poking into my arm, or into Kitty's arm since this is her bracelet. I'm going to use my wire cutters and just trim the wire. And if you want, if you're worried about these little ends being pokey, you can tuck the little ends in between the 2 cords in your wraps. So that's another way to make it look a little more finished and maybe not poke you. But that's one side done there. And now what we're going to do is do the same thing on the other side, and then we'll attach the clasp. So there's our cords on our nameplate there, and now we're just going to attach the clasp using the same technique we used here. But first we want to test the size of the bracelet. Kitty and I have about the same size wrist, so I'm just going to wrap that around like that and see how much is left. Looks like that's about 2.5 inches, so I'm going to slide my clasp, one side of my clasp, up to about 2.5 inches up the bracelet. So I'll feed this end through like this. And this loop is a little bit smaller than the hole that was in our bracelet. So there we go. I'm going to pull that up about 2.5 inches, which is about there. And I'm going to do the same thing I did before, which is fold this back and take my wire and then do my wire wraps. And this time I'm going to start in the middle of the wire and just wrap, because I don't really have a whole lot of stuff to hold on to keep it nice and straight. So I'm just going to start in the middle, and that way I can wrap a little bit on either side of where I started. And again, I'm just lining up my wraps as best I can. And you can always stop part way and manipulate them a little bit to get them closer. This is a great technique for attaching a clasp to something using very few tools and very few materials. You can just use wire and wire cutters rather than looking for jump rings and clamshell bead tips and everything else that you might need. And again, I'm just going to push those together a little bit, and then I'll trim. And we'll trim all of this silk cord also in a minute here. There we go, that's one side done. And I just want to test it again to make sure I've got the size right. Yep, that seems good. So I'll come up about the same distance on the other side of my silk cord. Feed that through my other side of my clasp. I'm going to fold the silk cord back on itself, like that. And then take my piece of wire and do the same thing I did before, which is hold this pretty taut, start in the middle of my wire, and then wrap. That's about 8 wraps there, and then I'm going to trim. My magnet keeps getting my wire cutters. There we go. And now what I can do is trim my little ends here. I'll leave a little bit. There we go. I do the same thing on these ends. Helps to have very sharp scissors for this silk. And there is our beautiful stamped metal bracelet.